At my son's engagement dinner, I handed his fiancée a small envelope. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Is this a birthday card, Dorothy? We're celebrating an engagement." Her mother tilted her head and smiled the way people smile when they feel sorry for someone. My son said nothing. He just looked down at his wine glass. I said nothing either. I picked up the envelope from where she dropped it on the table, put it back in my purse, and excused myself. I drove home in silence. The next morning, I called my solicitor. When I told him what I needed, he paused and said, "Dorothy, are you absolutely certain?" I said yes. What happened after that changed everything. Hey, quick question before we go on. Have you ever given someone a gift from the heart and watched them treat it like garbage? Drop a comment, I read every single one. And if stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe. Now, back to that dinner. It was a Friday evening in October, the kind of night in Oakville where the air smells like wood smoke and the leaves on the maples along Lakeshore Road have gone full amber. My son had chosen Riverbend Grill, a restaurant I'd never been to but recognized immediately as the sort of place designed to make certain people feel important. White tablecloths, a sommelier who presented the wine list like a sacred document, the kind of menu where nothing has a price printed beside it. I wore the gray wool dress I'd bought at a consignment shop on Kerr Street 3 years ago. It fit beautifully. I'd had my hair done that morning at the salon on Spears Road, where I'd been going for 11 years. I looked. I thought, perfectly respectable. My son, who I will call my son because that is what he is to me and always will be, had been with Cassandra for 14 months. I had met her 4 times before that evening. Each time, she had been pleasant in the way that certain people are pleasant when they are being watched, careful, surface level, slightly too interested in how things appeared. Her mother, Vivian, was a woman who wore her net worth the way some people wear perfume, constantly, unavoidably, in great quantity. My son stood when I walked in, which he had always done, because I had raised him to stand when someone enters a room. Cassandra stayed seated. Vivienne stayed seated. The man I assumed was Vivienne's husband glanced up briefly from his phone. We ordered. The conversation moved through the usual early stages, the proposal story, the tentative talk of venues, Cassandra showing me her ring with the particular pride of someone who had researched its carat weight and wanted you to know it. It was a beautiful ring. I told her so. I meant it. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, I reached into my bag and placed the envelope on the table in front of Cassandra. "I wanted to give you something," I said, "to welcome you to the family." She looked at it. Then she looked at my son. Then she picked it up in the way you pick up something you already suspect you won't want at the corner with 2 fingers, as if it might be damp. Inside was a folded note and a small card printed with an account number and a web address. Cassandra read the note. Her expression shifted, not softened. Shifted the way a face shifts when it's deciding between 2 reactions and chooses the wrong one. "Is this?" She turned the card over, as if looking for something more. "Is this a GIC?" "It is," I said. "Dorothy." She set it down on the tablecloth. "We're celebrating an engagement." That was when she laughed. It was a small laugh. Social. Carefully shaped to sound like affection rather than contempt. Vivian tilted her head. My son looked at his wine glass. "It's a guaranteed investment certificate," I said, keeping my voice even. "With the Royal Bank. It matures in 5 years. The return—" "Oh, I know what a GIC is." Cassandra smiled at her mother. "My grandmother used to give them at Christmas." She said the word grandmother the way you say something that belongs to a different, smaller world. I looked at my son. He was still looking at his wine glass. I picked up the envelope. I put it back in my purse. I finished my meal. I said goodbye to everyone at the table with warmth that I genuinely felt for my son and courtesy that I manufactured for the rest of them. I drove home on the QEW with the radio off. That night, I sat at the kitchen table in my house on Maple Grove Drive, the same house I had lived in for 31 years, the same house my son had grown up in, the same house where I had read to him every night until he was old enough to be embarrassed by it, and I opened my laptop. I did not cry. I had not cried over money or the appearance of money since 1993, and I did not intend to start. I opened the spreadsheet I kept in a password-protected folder my son believed contained old tax returns. The spreadsheet had 42 rows. Each row was a property. Some were in the GTA, several were in Hamilton and Burlington, 2 were in London, Ontario. One was in Halifax that I'd bought sight unseen in 2009 when everyone said the East Coast market was a gamble. The total current market value in the right-hand column, updated quarterly by my property manager, read $28.4 million. I had started with a semi-detached on Barton Street in Hamilton in 1991, the year after my divorce. I had been working as a bookkeeper at a small manufacturing firm in Stony Creek, earning $31,000 a year, raising my son alone, and paying attention. I paid attention to the way properties moved in neighborhoods people hadn't discovered yet. I paid attention to the way the men at the firm talked about real estate when they thought I wasn't listening. I paid attention to foreclosure listings in the Hamilton Spectator every Friday. The semi-detached cost $68,000. Every tradesperson I knew thought it was a terrible idea. I fixed the plumbing myself from a library book, repainted every room, replaced the back fence, and rented it to a young couple for $900 a month. That $900 bought me the next property, and the next one, and the one after that. I had never told my son the full extent of it. I told him I did well with a few rental properties. I wanted him to build his own life without the weight of expectation or the ease of assumption. I wanted him to become someone who valued work because of what work builds in you, not because his mother had money or didn't have money. I had been wrong about the strategy. I could see that now, sitting at my kitchen table at 11:30 at night with a cup of tea gone cold. What I had taught my son by saying nothing was not the value of work. What I had taught him was that my life, my choices, my decades of quiet effort, were not worth mentioning. He had looked at his wine glass. I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet and looked at the last 2 rows, which I had never shown anyone. One row was labeled Crown and Birch Holdings Restaurant Group, partial ownership stake, 3 locations in the GTA. I had taken an equity position in 2017 when a former tenant introduced me to his business partner who needed capital and had an extraordinary concept but couldn't get a conventional loan. I believed in the concept. I wrote the check. The second location of Crown and Birch Holdings, which had opened in Oakville in early 2020, was called Riverbend Grill. I owned 22% of the restaurant where Cassandra had laughed at my envelope. I closed the laptop and went to bed. I didn't sleep for a long time. When I did, I had already made a decision. The next morning I called my solicitor, a man named Gerald Ford who had handled my real estate transactions for 19 years and who knew better than almost anyone alive exactly what I was worth. "Dorothy," he said, when I'd explained what I wanted, "are you absolutely certain?" "I am." "This will have implications." "I understand that." A pause. "All right. Give me 3 days." I gave him 3 days. In those 3 days, I also called a woman named Patricia Sue, who had been my property manager for 12 years and who ran things with a competence and discretion I had come to depend on completely. "Patricia," I said, "I need the files on the Lakeshore property." "The commercial unit?" "Yes." The commercial unit on Lakeshore Road East in Oakville was a mixed-use building I had purchased in 2014. Street-level retail, 2 floors of office space above. I had updated the leases twice. The current ground floor tenant was a boutique interior design firm. The second floor was divided into 3 suites. One of those suites, Suite 204, 1,200 square feet facing the lake, was the office where Cassandra worked as a junior associate for a wealth management firm called Hollis & Carr. I had not known this when I bought the building. I found out 14 months ago, when my son first brought Cassandra to meet me and mentioned, with some pride, where she worked. I had nodded and said it sounded like a lovely firm, and then gone home and pulled my lease files and sat very quietly for a few minutes. I had said nothing then. I was saying something now. Patricia sent me the files. I reviewed them. I called Gerald back on day 3. I also, during those 3 days, did something I had never done before in 14 months of knowing my son was serious about this woman. I hired someone to do a background check. I want to be honest about that. It felt, when I dialed the number Patricia had given me, like exactly the kind of thing I would have said I'd never do. But I kept thinking about his wine glass, about the way he had not looked up, about the fact that something in me had recognized, on 4 separate occasions over 14 months, a quality in Cassandra that I could not name and had chosen not to examine too closely because it was not my place. It was my place now. The investigator was a woman named Ruth Calloway, based in Mississauga, former RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. She had a voice like a school principal and a manner that suggested she had heard everything and was no longer surprised by any of it. "Give me a week," she said. I gave her a week. In the meantime, I went about my life. I volunteered on Tuesday mornings at the Oakville Public Library, where I had been running a reading program for seniors for 6 years. I had coffee on Thursday with my neighbor Elaine. I went to my Wednesday evening yoga class in the church basement on Trafalgar Road. I called my son once. He did not call back. Ruth Calloway came back to me in 6 days. We met at a coffee shop on Cornwall Road, a quiet place I had chosen because I had never been there with my son and did not want to run into anyone who knew either of us. Ruth arrived 5 minutes early, which I respected. She ordered a black coffee and placed a folder on the table between us. "Cassandra Whitmore," Ruth said, "has been engaged before, twice." I looked at her. The first engagement ended 18 months after it began, when the fiancé's family discovered she had added herself as a joint account holder on 2 of his personal accounts without his knowledge. No charges were filed. The family signed a confidentiality agreement. The fiancé moved to Edmonton. The second? Ruth turned a page. 2 years ago. A man in his early 40s owned a small chain of dry cleaning businesses in Brampton. The engagement lasted 8 months. He ended it. His sister, I spoke with her, says he found evidence that Cassandra had been using his credit card to purchase items she returned for cash refunds. Again, no formal complaint. I thought about the way Cassandra had looked at the GIC card, at the way she had looked at everything I owned or represented with that careful, measuring quality I had felt but not been able to name. She had been measuring me, estimating, filing away the result under not worth pursuing. "There's more," Ruth said. "Tell me." "She and her mother have been managing her approach to your son quite deliberately. I spoke with a former friend of Cassandra's, they had a falling out last year, who told me that Cassandra specifically identified your son as a target because she believed his family had money. Quote, Cassandra said the mother was hiding something, that it didn't add up." Ruth paused. She was right, of course. It just didn't add up in the direction she expected. I sat with that for a moment. She had been right. I had been hiding something. I had been hiding it for the same reason I had kept the GIC in my purse for 3 years, because I wanted to give it at the right moment, because I believed the right moment would come. "My son," I said. "Is he? He has no knowledge of any of this." "I'm confident of that." Ruth closed the folder. "He's genuinely in love with her. That's the part that complicates things." I nodded. "Thank you, Ruth." I paid the bill and drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for a while before going inside. I had a choice. I could call my son and tell him what I knew. He would not believe me. He would think I was a woman who had felt humiliated at a dinner and was now manufacturing reasons to object. He would choose her. I was not ready to lose him to that choice. Or I could wait. I could let the situation develop the way situations like this always develop under pressure, when there is no longer anywhere to hide. I chose to wait. And I chose to rearrange a few things while I waited. The first call I made was to the managing partner at Crown and Birch Holdings. His name was Daniel, and he was a good businessman and a decent person who had always treated me with the genuine respect of someone who understood that my capital had made his dream possible. "Dorothy," he said, "everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I'd like to exercise my rights under Section 7 of our shareholder agreement." A brief pause. The operational consultation clause. Yes, that clause allowed me, as a minority shareholder above 20%, to be consulted on significant vendor and staffing matters. I had never exercised it before. I exercised it now. I made 2 specific requests regarding Riverbend Grill. I asked Daniel to keep my ownership stake confidential, which it already legally was. I had always been a silent partner, but I wanted to be explicit. and I asked to be notified if the restaurant was ever booked for a private event associated with the Whitmore family or the name Cassandra. Daniel agreed to both without asking questions. He was a good businessman. The second call was to Patricia Sue regarding Suite 204 on Lakeshore Road. The Hollison car lease comes up for renewal in March, Patricia said. I know. I'd like you to send a standard renewal notice. Market rate. No exceptions on terms. That's a 15% increase from current. I'm aware. Patricia, who had been managing my properties for 12 years, simply said, understood, and made a note. The third thing I did was write a letter to my son. Not to send. To clarify my own thinking. I wrote it by hand in the kitchen at midnight and then folded it and put it in the same fireproof box where I kept my property deeds. It said everything I should have said years ago about the duplex on Barton Street, about 30 years of early mornings and late nights, about why I had kept it from him and why I now understood that keeping it from him had been a form of silence that served me more than it served him. I owed him that honesty. I would give it to him at the right moment. I was getting better at knowing when the right moment was. 3 weeks passed. My son called twice. Both calls were short and warm in the surface way. Calls are warm when someone is managing something underneath. He mentioned the engagement party they were planning. He mentioned Cassandra was looking at venues. He did not mention the dinner. On a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the dinner at Riverbend Grill, Ruth Calloway called me. I've been keeping an eye on things, as you asked, she said. Cassandra opened a joint savings account at TD 2 weeks ago. Your son is listed as a co-holder. He knows about the account? He opened it with her. That was legal and reasonable for an engaged couple. I noted it. There's something else. Ruth's voice changed slightly, not alarmed, but precise. She's been making inquiries. About your assets. She's spoken to someone at the land registry office. She ran a property search under your name. What did she find? The residential properties you hold directly under your own name, 7 of them. She doesn't appear to have found the holdings under your numbered companies. So she had found 7 properties. Enough to understand that her initial estimate of me had been wrong. Not enough to understand how wrong. Thank you, Ruth. I hung up and looked at the kitchen window. The maple in the front yard had gone bare. It was November in Oakville, which is a particular kind of gray and still. I called my son. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was not in a meeting and was not avoiding me. I think it's time we had a proper dinner, I said. Just the 2 of us. I have some things I'd like to tell you. A pause. Is everything okay? Everything is fine. I just think there are some things you should know. About me. About what I've built. I should have told you years ago and I didn't, and that was a mistake. Another pause, longer. Okay, he said. Saturday? Saturday. We had dinner at my kitchen table, which is where we had always had the conversations that mattered. I made the roast chicken with potatoes he had requested every birthday until he was 16. I opened a bottle of Niagara Riesling. I put the folder on the table between us the same way Ruth had put hers between us 6 weeks earlier, and I told him everything. The properties. The numbered companies. The Crown and Birch stake. The spreadsheet with 42 rows. The total in the right-hand column. He didn't say anything for a long time after I finished. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to become who you are without the shadow of it. I wanted you to work because work matters, not because you thought you'd inherit something or wanted to prove something. I wanted you to be kind to people because they deserve kindness, not because you were performing for a wealthy mother. I'm kind to people, he said quietly. You are. You grew up to be a genuinely good person. I'm proud of you every day. I paused. But at that dinner 6 weeks ago, you looked at your wine glass. He was very still. You didn't say anything, I said. When she laughed. When she put that envelope down like it was something embarrassing. You looked at your wine glass and you let it happen. He closed his eyes briefly. I know. I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to choose between her and me. I'm asking you to look clearly at what you're choosing when you choose her. I'm asking you to ask yourself why you didn't say anything. He didn't answer that. He picked up his fork and set it down again. There's something else I need to tell you, I said, and I need you to hear it the way it's meant, not as an attack, as information. I told him what Ruth had found. The 2 previous engagements, The accounts, the property search, the conversation with Cassandra's former friend. He was very quiet for a long time. You had someone investigate her. I did. He stopped. I know what it is. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. And I know you may be angry with me for it. But you are my son, and I watched a woman laugh at a gift I gave her from 30 years of my life, and you looked at your wine glass, and I was not going to sit quietly and watch what happened next without understanding what I was watching. He stood up and walked to the kitchen window, stood there for a moment looking at the dark yard. Then he sat back down. She ran a search on your properties? 6 weeks ago. He absorbed that. I watched him absorbing it. I watched the particular expression that crosses a face when something you didn't want to be true turns out to be true. It is not anger. At first, it is a kind of settling, like ground after a shift. What do I do? He said. That's your question to answer. Not mine. But you have a view. I always have a view. I'm your mother. I folded my hands on the table. I think you need to speak with her honestly. Tell her what you know. Watch how she responds. Not what she says, how she responds. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. And I think, I said, that you should know the following, because it may matter in how you have that conversation. Suite 204 inches, the Lakeshore building, the office where she works. That building is mine. Her firm's lease comes up for renewal in March. I have made no decision about that renewal. I want you to understand that I have made no decision that is not a threat, and it is not a lever. It is simply a fact that you should have. I paused. You should have all the facts. You've gone long enough without them. He looked at me for a moment, and in that moment I saw him very clearly, not the adult across the table, but the child I had read to, the boy who had learned to stand when someone entered a room, the person I had tried, imperfectly, to raise towards something worth becoming. I'm sorry I looked at my wine glass, he said. I know. I reached into my cardigan pocket and placed the envelope on the table, the same one from 6 weeks ago. I had been carrying it since the dinner, not out of sentimentality. I am not especially sentimental, but because I hadn't yet found the right moment. This is still for you, I said. It was always for you. Both of you. If you build something worth building together, take it or leave it. He picked it up. He held it in both hands this time. I will tell you what happened over the following weeks, not because the details are dramatic, they were not. Mostly. But because the quiet things matter as much as the loud ones. And I think people forget that. In stories like this one, my son spoke with Cassandra. I do not know everything that was said. He told me, in a phone call that lasted 40 minutes, that when he raised the question of the property search, she had first denied it, and then, when he showed her the registry records Ruth had pulled, had pivoted immediately and smoothly to a justification. She said she'd been curious. She said she'd wanted to understand the family she was marrying into. She said he was being paranoid. She said his mother had clearly poisoned him against her. And then she cried. He said she cried very convincingly. He ended the engagement 3 days later. He called me from his car, parked outside his apartment building in Toronto. His voice was steady in the way voices are steady when someone has made a decision they know is right and it has cost them something real. I'm okay, he said. I know you are. It's going to take a while. Of course it is. A pause. The GIC, he said. The 5-year one. Yes. Is it what's in it? I had been waiting for him to ask. Enough to make a down payment on something worth owning, I said. If you decide that's what you want. He was quiet for a moment. Tell me about the duplex on Barton Street. So I did. I told him the whole story, the Spectator listings, the library book on plumbing, the young couple who had been my first tenants and sent me a Christmas card for 11 years afterward. I told him about the second property and the third. I told him about the morning in 2004 when Patricia called to say that the Hamilton portfolio had crossed $2 million in total value, and I had sat at this same kitchen table and drunk my tea and thought, quietly, that I had done something. He listened to all of it. He asked questions, good questions, careful ones, the kind that told me he was taking it in rather than just hearing it. His father had never asked questions like that. His son did. We talked for 2 hours. The Hollis and car lease was renewed in March at market rate. I signed the papers without drama. Ruth Calloway sent me a brief note saying she had heard through her networks that Cassandra had left the firm in February and moved to Calgary. I wished her no harm. I also did not lose sleep over it. In April, my son drove out to Oakville on a Sunday, and I took him to see the building on Lakeshore Road. We stood on the sidewalk in the thin spring sun and looked up at it, 3 stories of pale brick, good bones, newer windows I'd put in during the 2018 renovation. "You own this," he said. Among others, he shook his head slowly, not in disbelief but in the particular way people shake their heads when they are recalibrating something. "You were here the whole time." I was here the whole time. We walked along the lake after that, the way we used to on Sunday afternoons when he was small and I had the energy and he had the questions. He had the questions again now, about properties, about how to evaluate them, about what I had learned and what I had gotten wrong, about whether I would teach him. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what I'd like to do." We had dinner at the kitchen table again that evening. I did not make a speech. I did not frame it as a lesson or a legacy or a turning point. I made pasta, which he had also loved as a child, and we ate it and talked about ordinary things, his job, the spring, whether the maple in the front yard needed to be trimmed. Before he left, he picked up the GIC card from where it had sat on the sideboard since October. 5 years, he said. 5 years. And then it's yours, to do whatever you decide is worth doing with it. He turned the card over in his hand, the same gesture Cassandra had made, with such different weight behind it. "Mum," he said, "what's actually on this? What's the value?" I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up at me with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was very young, since the nights when he would come downstairs because he couldn't sleep, and I would make him warm milk, and we would sit together in this kitchen, in the particular peace of having nowhere to be and nothing to perform. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the money." I understood that. And I understood, too, that I was thanking him for something, for the questions he had asked that afternoon, for driving out on a Sunday, for the 40-minute phone call from his car, for being someone I had quietly, privately, been proud of for 30 years and had not said so nearly enough. "It was never spare change," I said. "It was never spare anything. It was everything I could figure out how to give you." He nodded. He put the card in his jacket pocket. He hugged me at the door, the long kind, the kind that means something. I watched his car pull out of the driveway and disappear down Maple Grove Drive, and then I went back inside and washed up the dinner dishes and turned off the kitchen light. Outside, the maple was starting to bud. Spring in Oakville, coming in quietly, the way good things usually do. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know why in the comments. Have you ever held something back from someone you love, meaning to protect them, and realized too late that the silence was its own kind of cost? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because the stories that matter most are usually the ones that happen in ordinary kitchens, between ordinary people, where nobody's watching. Those are the stories I'm here to tell.